All right, coming at you all the way live from the town. This is Revolution. What's up, everybody? What's up, party people? How are you doing out there? For patrons, I'm sorry that it took so long for me to get this episode up. We had a special live stream that we did today, and when I say today, I mean January 9th. And if you're a patron, you get the episode a day early, 24 hours earlier. And this morning, there was a special live stream with Pascal and myself. Dan Larson, host of Toy Galaxy. Derek Varn, host of Pop the Left and Theorizing with a Hammer. Dejeen Bajlan. I don't know if Dejeen has his own show right at the moment, but you've seen him on the Michael Brooks show countless times. I believe he's been on the Majority Report, definitely been on with Doug Lane and Zero Books numerous times. So, and there's some new music that you may hear. This music is from a good friend of mine, Ty Hockey, from the band Stimuli. Ty also made another theme for the show, so the real electronic-y sounding one is that I usually use for the intro to the show is also Ty. But everything else you hear is me. All the music for the clips, everything else is me. So this show is from a live stream Pascal and I did on Tuesday with Hannah Appel of the Debt Collective. And I've had Hannah on before, probably like 3 months ago or so, 4 months or so ago. And the day I had her on was the day that the Debt Collective's book, Can't Pay, Won't Pay, came out. And there's quite a few writers of the book. Astra Taylor, filmmaker, was one of the writers of the book. And so I didn't have it to review. I just had to go through Hannah's writing. And she actually has a lot of articles that she's written over the years. And, you know, and we definitely had enough to talk about. That being said, we definitely got into the book. The day we did the show, the book was free at the time on Haymarket Books. So I actually got a downloaded copy, but I am not a fan of reading stuff downloaded. I read enough. I get my newspapers through that, so I have to read enough glowing screens, and I hate getting alerts. I try to turn alerts off, but then I still need some of those alerts. So Pascal and I sat down and tried to read the glowing screens, but the book is just so good. I totally forgot that I was on my tablet for a second. The book feels like a call to arms to me for people to organize and understand our collective power and the power that we need to wield against the shackles of debt. We talk a lot about that in the episode. We had some Hannah had some audio issues. I would say probably like the first 2.5 minutes. So Pascal and I talk a lot about some of the things that she had to say in the book. And here's a pic from the hold on, I think I read that during the episode. The idea that human beings have a monetary value, or what some call human capital, is the essence of financialization. And it has deep and insidious roots in 19th century transnational finance. Take another example from the same period. How did U.S. planters secure the money they needed to grow all that cotton? British merchants looking to import raw cotton would lend them the capital to buy enslaved people, cottonseed, tools, and food to feed their labor force. After harvest, planters were expected to repay British investors with interest. To finance something, after all, means to provide capital with the expectation of future profit. But what if planters had a bad crop that year? Or the price of global cotton fell? Or there was an uprising on their plantation? Meaning, what if the planter couldn't pay back the loan? To make a contemporary analogy, when people can't pay their mortgages, they lose their homes. In finance terminology, the house was collateral on the loan, essentially something of value the lender can take if the borrower can't pay. In the 19th century global cotton economy, people of African descent were the collateral. If the planter couldn't repay his London-based lender, he owed that lender his enslaved workers. To get a sense of the financial value of this workforce, historian Sven Beckart estimates that the value of enslaved people in the United States in 1860 was equal to all of the capital invested in American railroads, manufacturing, and agricultural land combined. In short, the United States emerged as a player in global capitalism through the commodification, theft, and enslavement of indigenous, African, and African-descendant peoples. Decades of international abolition organizing and anti-colonial independence struggles would eventually score significant victories, but at a steep price. Generations of Haitians were forced to pay the price of their predecessors' rebellion. Between 1825 and 1947, the French government imposed an annual payment on Haiti as compensation for slave owners' lost property, quote-unquote property. The sum totaled 150 million francs, later reduced to 90 million, an amount estimated to be about 40 billion in today's dollars, demanded by France for appropriated plantations and military expenditures. Kenya also began its independence in the 1960s, owing a debt of 29 million pounds to the departing British colonists who had stolen the Kenyans' land. The entire country was punished with permanent debt peonage because the people had fought successfully against enslavement. In the United States, after abolition, similar tactics were used to target individuals recently liberated from bondage. White landlords imposed unpayable debts via sharecropping and tenant farming arrangements to suppress black independence, while also creating a moral economy in which black people, instead of being owed reparations for centuries of stolen labor, were turned into debtors who owed white people gratitude for their emancipation. This is the past we must grasp in order to understand where we are today. Financialization is a contemporary development, but one that relies on wealth that came from the violent colonialist theft of land, lives, and labor. His ill-gotten wealth has been passed down through generations, allowing some to profit from this historical plunder, a phenomenon known as intergenerational wealth transfer. Meanwhile, black and indigenous people who start out life in households with fewer assets and resources on average than their white counterparts continue to pay the price. That's just a snippet of what is in Can't Pay, Won't Pay. And there's a really interesting chapter about Haiti. It definitely gets into the financialization. So this is the episode, the live stream with Hannah Appel of the Debt Collective about the book Can't Pay, Won't Pay with myself and Pascal Robert. If you would like to see this live and participate in the live stream, then you have to click the link in the description and go to the YouTube channel. Go to the Facebook page. Go to the Twitter page. Every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, if you have the ability and you'd like to help see the show grow, we have a link to the Patreon as well. So thank you guys and enjoy the conversation. It was a good one. Peace.
Do you want to be included in the American dream, quote unquote, of homeownership? Well, the way that we're going to include you, and I'll talk about that you in a minute, is through predatory lending practices, right? So subprime loans where the interest rate balloons, and payday loans, which you just narrated, right, do the same thing. And so much of this, and I'm so sorry, I'll shut up after this, but much of this is about the history of racial capitalism in the United States. So this is absolutely a class issue. I completely agree with you, but we cannot, and in my opinion, must not disentangle race and class in the United States, right? So if we look historically, like at what the GI Bill in terms of bringing people into homeownership, for whom did it do that? It did that for white, hetero families, right? Did it do that for domestic workers? Did it do that for who are at that point mostly Black and Latino? No. Did it do that for African-American workers in any sector of the society? No. So predatory inclusion is often things that were held out to mostly white families, certainly not poor white families, but mostly white families as part of the social safety net. When in the wake of the civil rights movement, you have all of these communities clamoring to get in, clamoring for inclusion, right? The capitalist class, which is also the political class, says, okay, but here are the terms. The terms are public college, which was called that because it was free, is no longer free. Now you have to debt finance it, even public college, right? And we'll prey on you with these predatory for-profit college advertisements that actually target Black and brown communities, veterans communities, right? Or, okay, you want access to a home loan where African-American families and Latinx families have been redlined from mortgage lending? Okay, but here's a subprime loan for you, right? So predatory inclusion specifically in the sort of racialized fabric of class in this country, beyond this country too, but certainly in this country.
All right. That voice you heard was a clip from a previous show guest that has agreed to come back. That's Hannah Appel. She is a associate professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. She's an economic anthropologist. And in this digital green room that we have here, we were having a discussion about what that exactly is. But what she is a part of is what got me really interested. A while back on Twitter, I saw these tweets that a friend of mine, actually, he's a guest on the upcoming podcast, Kelvin Martinez, does a lot of work with the Unhoused, was retweeting this group of people called the Debt Collective. And I was like, what the hell is a Debt Collective? So I looked them up online. I contacted them. And they said, one of us will contact you. So one of the reasons why the Hannah Appel episode just says the Debt Collective is they're just such a collective. They wouldn't tell me the person's name, so I couldn't get a picture of her beforehand. So she's here in real life. But first, before we bring Hannah out, I have to bring out my mellow, my man, Pascal Robert. How you living?
Living all right, good brother. Living well. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Looking forward to this episode. Very much so.
And let's bring out Dr. Hannah Appel, who also, I need to add this. The day that we did our interview was the day that her book came out.
Okay.
So I didn't get a chance to interrogate the book that day. She was like, "Oh my God, this book that I was a writer of, it came out today and they're giving it away free if you go to Haymarket Books." So I went to Haymarket Books and I downloaded it, and I'll say it right here, right now. I'm not real good at reading books with a glowing screen. I hate glowing screens. Pascal and I spend too much of our time at glowing screens. So I wanted to get the real book at one point. It's sooner than later. And I'm going to have Hannah autograph it for me, whether she likes it or not. Please welcome, coming all the way from Los Angeles, California. How are you?
Hey, suddenly you went mute on me. How did that happen?
I don't know. Can you hear us now?
Oh, I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
Oh, problem. Can you hear
You
me?
said coming all the way from Los Angeles, California. I can see you. I can see your
yeah.
mouths moving, but I can't hear you.
Can't hear
all
mine either.
We can all hear you. And people are interested in what you have to say now. And you can't hear us.
You can't hear us at all.
I can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
What happened? Oh no.
Jason, you
That's
blew
so
out the
trippy.
audio.
We were in the green room. I could hear you fine.
Here, we're gonna piggyback to the green
Okay.
room and see if that works. I want to read an excerpt from Dr. Appel's book while we try to fix these audio issues. This is in one of the earlier chapters of the book. It says, debt, however, is more than a trap. It's a form of social control. To give just one example, in 2019, the U.S. Army actually admitted that they exceeded their recruiting goals by targeting students in debt. As Army Recruiting Command Major General Frank Muth put it, one of the national crises right now is student loans. So 31,000 is about your average. You can get out of the Army after 4 years, 100% paid for state college anywhere in the United States. To be indebted makes us vulnerable to predators of all kinds, including predatory lenders, predatory debt collectors, and predatory military recruiters. Can you hear us now? Oh, she still can't hear.
Can you hear either one of us?
Yes.
She's gonna leave and come back.
Yep. She's gonna come right back. She's been having some audio issues, so she's gonna try to leave and come back. Pascal, what was your take on the book?
I found the book fascinating. I'll be very honest with you. I found the book fascinating because it did something that in all the years upon which people have been trying to fight for economic justice, have been using tactics going back to the Pinkertons, tactics going back to the populist movement, strike bricks, wildcat strikes. The idea of organizing around people who have to pay debt, being able to create a union of debtors to coalesce around having their debts combined in a way to demand forgiveness. I wouldn't say forgiveness. Demand justice for their debts is a profoundly fascinating technique that I'm wondering why in this era of hyper financialization that we've had over the last 50 years has not been considered before. And I can understand why the debt collective has been so organized in its challenge to the traditional perception of debt and credit in the United States, that their efforts and tactics have risen to the point where they are getting acknowledged by the Joe Biden administration, and things that they have been fighting for, student loan debt forgiveness, things of that nature, are now being incorporated into policy platforms of major Democratic candidates. That's something that is very significant. Now, whether or not those candidates will go through with those agendas is one thing. But the fact that the debt collective has been able to raise their profile as an activist anti-debt group on those terms is pretty impressive.
Yes. So there's a problem that she's having with the link, so I'm trying to straighten that out right now. Also, there's a pretty interesting chapter on Haiti that we were gonna interrogate.
Yes, she has a chapter on financialization and the Haitian Revolution, where she talks about how the way in which Haiti was forced to recompensate France for the debt of its independence and victory in the Haitian Revolution was a bit of a precursor in the way in which global debt was actually used as a means of financialization throughout the world. I really look forward to having her explain that more effectively in terms of how that process transpires. So the book was quite fascinating. The factoids that they expose in the debt, for example, she exposes how Ronald Reagan, when governor of California, was so dismayed by the student protests to Vietnam that he actually mandated cuts to state university subsidies so that tuition could go up intentionally, making public goods services, i.e. public education at state universities, increasingly expensive as a means to neutralize the capacity to the youth in the state to congregate at state universities and challenge the state on the grounds of imperialism. And that tradition of state education being gouged from students to the rates that we have today starts with Reagan. That's one of the myriad of facts that's exposed in the book that I was very, 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 very impressed with in terms of how it explains how America as a country moves to debt as its main mechanism.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
So loud and clear. How America moves to debt as its main mechanism. I'm right there. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
No.
We were over here talking about your book while I'm trying to fix the link. So
oh my goodness. Thank you for sending the new one.
Quotes from the book. So hopefully you got a few copies sold.
Announce the title of the book. I don't think you announced the title of the book, please.
Here's the book.
Can't pay, won't pay.
The book is called Can't Pay, Won't Pay, The Case for Economic Disobedience and Debt Abolition.
So can you...
Dr. Appel.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
If you can. I know you wanted me to call you Hannah, and I'm honored that you would allow me to do that. But I believe you work too hard and you offer too much to not have your title be recognized. So
that's very generous. I appreciate that. I feel like we all work hard, and some of us have the title.
One of the things that I was saying that while you were working out your technical issues for us was that I am, as someone who considers himself a student of left activism against capital and capitalism and the ruling class in this country, going back to the Pinkerton riots, to the populist movement, to wildcat strikes, to the various types of radical activities the left has taken forth to fight management. It is stunning to me that something as such a basically utilitarian concept, a debt union, to organize around debt, particularly considering that the founding fathers of the United States knew and recognized debt as a form of bondage, and that when drafting the Constitution, they ensured that debtors were not on the same plane as creditors. I would love you to start there talking about that. And I'd also like you to introduce yourself as an economic anthropologist and what that really means to our audience, to explain to us what that really means.
Okay.
It's a very valuable kind of skill you have.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm going to go to that question first, right? Like debtors unions, as you say, better than I could, seems like such a straightforward tactic, right? It seems like such a straightforward and yet radical theory of power. So why haven't we seen them? And there are a bunch of ways where we can say, well, actually, historically, we have seen them in some ways. And the most kind of approachable example, accessible example is in a tenants union, right? There have been tenants unions for half a century, more than half a century. I don't know the specific history of tenants unions, but it is to say we all understand that if we get together in our apartment complex and if our landlord is raising the rent too high, or if there are cockroaches crawling around in our building, or if they're, right, alone, me, tenant, going up to landlord saying like, look, this shit is crazy. Tenant's going to be like, or landlord's going to be like, whatever. But if if I say, and I'm going to withhold my rent until you fix it, the landlord is going to say, whatever, see you later. But if all of us in our building, or if all of us in all of the buildings the landlord owns say, we will collectively withhold until you meet our demands, right? Then we are essentially exercising our power, our collective power. We can only wield it if we organize collectively over that landlord, right? So the principle is the same, whether it's debt from the criminal punishment system, whether it's debt from the medical system, whether it's housing debt, as I just talked about, it would include mortgages, and we can talk about that, or whether it's student debt, they're all, right, credit card debt, payday lending debt. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that we can spin this. But to your question about why haven't we seen this in the way that we've seen labor unions, I would say that part of that is about changes in capitalism itself. Mm. So, thank you for that punctuation. So what I would say is that in industrial capitalism, right, workers' unions, labor unions make a lot of sense as a way to exercise collective power because we, the workers, share a factory floor. We, the teachers, share a school district, right? While we are still in many ways in industrial capitalism, much of industrial production, as we know, has moved overseas, and there has been year after year, decade after decade of suppression from the top of worker organizing in the United States. But where we are in capitalism right now is a kind of hybrid, right, of industrial capitalism and financial capitalism, right? Which is to say that the capitalist class no longer primarily makes their money through producing things, well, workers producing things and them sucking up the profits, right? But also a sort of central way that the capitalist class makes money now is through rent seeking, through the payments off of all of our debts, whether that is our medical debt, whether that's debts in the human caging system, whether that's our credit card debt, certainly whether it's our mortgage debt, whether it's our student debt, right? So debt payments, and of course the secure, like secondary markets and all of those debt payments, is a huge way that the capitalist class makes money now. That wasn't true in the same way even 30 or 40 years ago, right? Which is to say that in some ways we have a new opportunity in front of us. It's a response to how capitalism works now, that now we hold in aggregate $1.7 trillion in student debt. Now, folks getting out of jail and prison hold on average $16,000, right, in debt from the criminal punishment system. Alone, those debts are a burden. They make us vulnerable. But together, organized as a form of power, as a form of leverage over the system, they actually give us power. They give us power to change that system in the same way that workers' unions do over industrial capitalism. So that's what I would say. I think there's a kind of historical shift in capitalism that makes debtors' unions more important now, or important is the wrong word, more powerful now, more potentially powerful now than they were or would have been 20, 30 years ago. And obviously this is even before coronavirus. Now that we're sort of deep in this mess, this is even more true.
I'd like you to take that and go two parts with it. When does the economy change? Excuse me.
Bless you.
Bless you, Sneezy.
Bless you.
When does this economy change to this new form of, dare I say, financialization, where we change from the industrial model? And why does it make that change? Mm-hmm. I'd like you to address that. If you recall the conversation we were having in the green room, maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah.
And two,
And why does it not start with Reagan?
Yes.
And why does it not start with Reagan? Yes, please. And two, and if you can, I would like, and I'm going to play. I don't like to use the term devil's advocate, but I'm going to play circumspect.
All right.
If this is such a revolutionary concept, why did you guys have such success so quickly by getting the left flank of capital to address your needs to the point where the Biden administration is using your talking points? Mm-hmm. Is that not possibly no? Is there not possibly a sign?
I love
that this is not radical at all.
Wow.
Well, Biden is talking about canceling. Let's be honest. There's a conversation, and maybe we can say it didn't necessarily start with Biden, but the 2016 election definitely brought up the conversation of student debt. Yep. And Elizabeth Warren, for whatever people want to say about Elizabeth Warren, definitely that was her ballywick was student debt.
Yep.
And now for Joe Biden to talk about student debt and to say that he wants to cancel some, right? And that number is getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah. So
I'll shut up.
No, I appreciate this. There are like two super complex questions on the table. So I'm gonna do my best. I took notes. I was like, oh my God, am I gonna remember question number one? Okay, but here we go. Question number one. So question number one was like this question about, I described in answering the earlier question, a kind of shift from industrial capitalism to financial capitalism. I want to be super clear. It's not like there used to be industrial capitalism and now there's financial capitalism. We live even within the borders of the United States, let alone within US empire, right? Or global capitalism. We live in a profound hybrid of those two, and workers' unions remain profoundly important. And in fact, maybe something we can talk about later, why workers' unions and debtors' unions need to work together. But what is this shift, right? When did it happen? So the conventional way to answer that question is to be like, well, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. And that's a very important way to answer this question, right? It's one way of sort of addressing clear histories of neoliberalism, when the idea became that that the only role of government was essentially to protect capitalism, was to be strong enforcers of private property rights, to be strong enforcers of the rights of the capitalist class, and to beat down the rights, right, of everybody else. One way to think about what neoliberalism means. But if we start our understandings of debt and finance from Thatcher and Reagan, we miss out on the much longer history of racial capitalism in this country, right? So the chapter that addresses this in the book, which I think is chapter 2 or chapter 3, it says, it's called something like A History of Financialization from Haiti to the Household, right? Because you have to think about histories of bondage, histories of enslavement, histories of colonialism and anti-colonial insurrection, right? Like we see in the Haitian Revolution, after which international financial institutions make arrangements so that the newly independent Haitian people, who are, of course, the vast majority of them African descendant people, right, actually have to pay back. They owe a debt to the colonizers who they have just kicked out, right? And they have to pay that debt off over literally hundreds of years. You see the same thing with Kenya and England, right? So if we only think about debt and indebtedness from the 1980s, we don't have the tools with which to explain the relationship between race, class, and capitalism in the United States, let alone in the world. That said, there are some very meaningful shifts that start in the 1980s, and you can see it in the corporate form, right? You can see it in corporations. So General Electric, which used to make like washing machines and engines for planes or something, I don't know exactly what General Electric made, light bulbs, right? A kind of conventionally industrial capitalist company. Mm-hmm. As you get to the 80s, as you get to the 90s, they make as much, if not more money as financiers, right? Mm-hmm. Car makers, they start to make as much, if not more money financing their cars, right? So they bring the financing in-house, so they partially become banks. And what that does is it changes our relationship, working people's relationship, to the corporation, right? We are no longer either just workers for the corporation or consumers of their products, but the way we are able to consume them is no longer through our wages, because our wages no longer keep up with inflation, but it is through the provision of finance from them, which for us is debt, right? So we go into deep debt for our medical care. We go into deep debt for our college education. We go into deep debt for our housing. We go into motherfucking debt if we go to jail or prison, right? So all of the things, many of the things we need to survive, and some of the things that kill us, right, unevenly, speaking about incarceration, become ways of indebting us. And that is a meaningful shift in the wake of the 80s and 90s. But you see the kinds of intergenerational differences, right? So that ends up affecting Black families really differently, Indigenous families really differently, Latinx families really differently, because of those longer histories of racial capitalism in which white wealth, right? Wealth in white families passes down intergenerationally. So even though I go into massive debt for my college, I might have an auntie, I as a white woman, I might have an auntie somewhere or a godmother somewhere who says, hey, can you make one of these payments for me? Or can you help me out? Because of those histories of racial capitalism that long predate Reagan and Thatcher, right? That is much less likely, statistically speaking, in Black families, in Latinx families, in Indigenous families. So when we start from Reagan and Thatcher, we miss understanding why debts today are so unevenly distributed. And this is the last thing I'll say about question one, and then I'll be quiet. But when you actually disaggregate debt statistics, what do you find? In student debt, it is Black women that disproportionately hold that debt. In incarceration debt, right? Debt from the criminal punishment system. It is Black and Latinx families that disproportionately own that debt. And even though it is generally people gendered as men in those families that are locked up, it is the women on the outside in those families who are trying their best to pay down that debt while also paying rent, while also taking care of the kids, while also trying to, right? Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to understand that shift that does toward financialization, that does in certain ways happen in the 80s, without understanding the much longer history of racial capitalism that does take us back to the Haitian Revolution, that does take us back to racial capitalism on a global scale. OMG, that was a long ass answer to question one. Should I go right to question two?
I just want you to know, Hannah, the only reason why you're here, is because I wanted to start the year off with what you guys are doing, because I think it's probably one of the more important things out there that for some reason no one's really talking about. This is real, actual movement that people are a part of. This isn't people playing pretend politics on the internet. And number two, you give long-winded answers. And cutting that 2-minute clip, I don't know if you know this, but it was hard because you have so much. You don't fuck around with a lot of garnish and other shit when you talk. You get right to the point. So that clip originally was probably about 10 minutes.
I know. I'm
fire.
so sorry.
And people can't really tell. You're like yelling at me in the clip too. So people can't really tell. I had to cut out getting chastised.
Really?
No,
my goodness.
It wasn't
I certainly hope not. All right. No. Well, okay. So that's the first question. I'll try to be slightly more, I don't know what the word, I'll try to be shorter in the second question.
No.
See, look, I'm rolling up my sleeves. I'm like, okay, here I go.
No. We, when I hit you up a while back to come on the show, I was kind of stoked for you to start the year off with this show. And then I've been following what the collective's been doing. I guess a bunch of people were in Philadelphia. Was it last night?
Yeah, big action in Philly last night for sure.
Which was very impressive because again, I kind of want to let pass because I don't want to go off on a tangent about how angry I get about other stuff that's happening on the internet. Reading the book, I was highlighting so many passages that were so good, and I could also, I think I could tell the ones that your ass wrote. I
wrote with some amazing people. There, Aster Taylor, Ann Larson, Thomas Goki. There's so many amazing people that contributed to that book for sure.
Well, none of them was crazy enough to try to talk to me on a podcast a few months back. So.
Fair enough. But shout out to Nathan. I see you there, Nathan.
Your Haiti chapter was definitely something that Pascal and I talked about. And when I saw it in the book, and I did forward Pascal a copy, I was like, I think you're gonna like this part about Haiti. And sure enough, he hits me up. He's like, man, I read this book. It's a really important book. And as you can see, I don't know if you're paying attention to some of the chat, but people are really enjoying. So please don't ever stop if you're on a roll.
All right. I appreciate that. I tend to get a little carried away, but it's passion speaking. Okay. So the Pascal's second question, right, was the devil's advocate question, which was like, okay, if y'all are so revolutionary, why is it that you have Biden like parroting your talking points, right? And I hear it's a provocation. I hear that question, and I think it's a great question.
Uh-oh, here she comes.
You see the deep breath? Oh my God.
Here she comes. She's about to drop it.
So this is what I was going to say, actually. I was going to hail my friend, the recently departed, may he rest in power, David Graeber.
Oh.
Right? David, dear friend.
Shout out to David Graeber.
Of the Debt Collective more broadly. So this was, I think, probably one of the last books that David blurbed. So there's a nice line, some nice lines from David in here. And obviously all of us are indebted.
You got a lot of big lefties blurb that book. I got to say, you got the whole democracy crowd up in it. Democracy Now crowd up in it.
Yeah. So the reason I want to bring up David to start my answer to this question is this. You know, David always used to say, we have to recognize victory even when it's super fucked up and compromised. And one of the examples he always used to give was the pink ribbons for breast cancer, right? He's like, we all hate the pink ribbons. The pink ribbons are a commodification of breast cancer. They do fucked up gender shit that says all people who have breasts like the color pink, and, you know, whatever. But he says, the pink ribbons are one of the signs that the feminist movement has won. Yes, is it a capitalist kind of assimilation of a particular kind of feminist winning? Of course it is. And we can acknowledge that. And we can acknowledge all of those compromises, right? And at the same time, for a long time, if it was a women's disease like breast cancer, there was no medical attention to it, right? So a much more radical feminist movement puts that on the agenda, right? In the ways that we're talking about the radical racialized health disparities now under the pandemic that, of course, long predate the pandemic, right? Much more radical folks put it on the agenda, and then parts of it get sucked up and assimilated. And we have to see that as still a kind of peripheral piece of a radical win. Okay, so I'm going to start with David because I love David and because I think that's a useful illustration. But here's the real answer. Oh my God, here I go again, long ass answer. Let's go back to 2011. A bunch of us who are part of the Debt Collective now, though not all of us, are also part of Occupy Wall Street. We're in New York. Some of us are in Oakland. I'm talking about New York for right now. It's 2011. And in 2011, student debt hits $1 trillion with a T, right? Occupy Wall Street comes out, recognizes One T Day, what we call One T Day, has a huge action in the streets of New York. All the CUNY kids come out, all the SUNY kids come out, Columbia kids come out, NYU kids come out. They're not kids, right? Whatever. Folks, debtors, including people who are not at those schools anymore and are just holding the debts and don't have a job, right? It's One T Day. And because Occupy was getting media attention at the time, the media came out for the action. And I'm talking here about like kind of mainstream progressive media, NPR, let's say. They're not really progressive, but I don't know what you call it, liberal media, mainstream liberal media. NPR comes out, Reuters sends this guy, I think his name was Chadwick Matlin. Oh, I just called you out on a podcast. I think that was his name. And they derided us. They made fun of us. NPR derided us. They were like, these activists say that they want their student debt forgiven. And on the back of that, they want free college. As if free college wasn't something that public college used to mean when it was just white dudes who went there, right? So little historical memory that the largest public university system in the world, where I happen to teach, the University of California system, was free. That's what public college meant. Tuition-free school. We send our kids to the public school across the street. We know what that means. That means we don't have to pay tuition. If we send them to private school, we have to pay tuition or go into debt or get a grant. It used to be the same thing for college and not that long ago, right? And yet the historical memory in this country is so short that even the so-called liberal media deride us in 2011, right? But we start moving with this idea of a debtors union. We organize with Nathan. Nathan, I see you up in here, right? The nation's first student debtors union of people who hold debts from for-profit colleges. Those people come out, 15 of them first, Nathan, on this show, right? There you are, Nathan, I see you. 15 of them on this show say, 15 of them on the show, 15 of them, including Nathan, who's up there in the chat, say, we can't pay these debts and we won't pay these debts. They politicize the fact that they can't pay back the loans that they took out to get this predatory education, in this case from for-profit colleges. And then we make this online legal dispute tool. 70,000, 80,000 people, 90,000 people eventually use it, including folks who will decide that they can't take on the personal risk of a debt strike right now. And we should talk about that, the risks of debt striking, right? 90,000 people use it. Eventually we get to the kind of twilight of the Obama era. So we launched the union in like 2014. This is around 2016, 2017, right? Student debtors, again, including Nathan, are invited to the table in Washington, D.C. because 90,000 people filled out what's called the defense to repayment. The only way to get your student debts discharged right now, if you went to a for-profit college, is now called, right, in the Department of Education rulebook, defense to repayment. And that is thanks to this organizing. So it was years of struggle that have gotten us or taken us from a position of derision, right? We were completely dismissed in 2011, which, it's not that long ago, right? So we're literally 1 decade later, when everybody across the political spectrum in this God-forsaken election season, right? Whether you were on the right, whether you were President Trump or whoever else, or you were on the left and you were Bernie Sanders, everybody had to have a position on student debt. In other words, the debt collective brought it in to the national conversation, into the public conversation, using the tactic of a debt strike. Now, does Biden parrot our talking points? I wish Biden parroted our talking points. Joe Biden would be like, let's see, what would Joe Biden say if he parroted our talking points? Fuck capitalism, fuck privatizing education, public college should be free, and all $1.7 trillion of student debt should be forgiven, abolished, precisely because it is the first thing I can do to close the racial wealth gap in this country. Now, I haven't heard Biden say any of those things. And in fact, the reason that student debt is not dischargeable in bankruptcy is thanks to
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden,
right? So it's like I could hardly say that Joe Biden parrots our talking points. But what I would say, I'll take the David Graeber win. Say it again.
He's appropriated some of your philosophy.
The messaging, I would say. Yeah.
But let's look at it in David's way, right? David Graeber's way, which is to say that power, that grassroots power, that collective action forced their hand, right? So it's like, yeah, they appropriated it, right? Yeah, there's a pink ribbon, student debt. But all we must do is to stay organized and to get even bigger, and then to actually get them parroting our positions, which would be a huge win, right?
Now, I have a quick question. Yeah. It's to that talking point. The pushback on that, which is the same pushback that like Mitch McConnell gave on $2,000, is if we forgive student debt, you're letting rich kids off the hook. What is it?
Yeah.
What do you say, or what do you tell the people to say when they get hit with that very, very silly talking point?
Yeah, no, people use that talking point all the time. And this is what I would say. Folks haven't done their homework. That's basically the first thing I would say. And what do I mean by folks haven't done their homework? It used to be that it was only people, or primarily people, from upper middle class and wealthy families that pursued master's degrees, which is where a shit ton of the debt comes from now, and PhD degrees, right? Less of the debt comes from there. It's most often master's degrees, right? Lots of debt comes from master's, let alone undergraduate degrees. That used to be the fact, that it was sort of a prestige degree to get a master's degree, certainly to get a law degree, to get a medical degree, to get a dental degree, and to a certain extent that's still true, but way less than that was true historically. So if you actually look at the demographics now, again, what you see is of that $1.7 trillion of outstanding student debt, when you disaggregate that by racial category, what you see is that debt is disproportionately held by Black women, right? The debtors who have defaulted on their debts are disproportionately Latinx and Black households. Why? Still facing discrimination in the labor market, don't have access to that intergenerational wealth, right? So if you are to discharge all of that $1.7 trillion, you are disproportionately helping, right, Black women, Latinx families, trying in a small way. It's not going to get anywhere near the entire racial wealth gap that we're looking at in this country. But it is one thing that I will say, this is important, Joe Biden can do on day one without congressional approval using compromise and settlement. We're getting wonky, but I can talk about that, to start closing the racial wealth gap. So what used to be true demographically, which is to say it's rich kids that pursue this, is now no longer true, because what can you do with a college education right now? Maybe you can be a barista at Starbucks, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you can get an unpaid internship, mm-hmm. but you can't do much with just a college education now. So many people feel compelled to try to go get an MA degree, to try to go get a higher degree. And college itself, where it used to be something that was just a pursuit of the middle class and upper middle class, college itself, especially thanks to the booming of for-profit colleges, but not only thanks to them, right, as formerly public universities like the one I teach at go private, right, everybody is trying to get a college education now because it's so hard to get a goddamn paying job, right? So the kinds of demographics that those people are speaking from when they say, oh, this really helps wealthy kids, it simply is no longer the case. It was the case maybe when those nice older white men were younger. They're not very nice. I'm just being sarcastic. It is no longer the case today. So I would suggest that they should go do their homework. Thank you very much. There's the professor of me coming out. Now call me Dr. Appel. Go do your homework, Mr. Hannah.
A college degree just to be a barista. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real talk. There's another part of the book that I definitely highlighted that I wanted to read, that I had ready. The coronavirus pandemic revealed just how out of touch elites are when it comes to most people's household budgets. In the spring of 2020, after millions had lost their jobs and food banks were feeding record numbers of people, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi appeared on a late-night comedy show to joke about how much gourmet ice cream she had stored in one of her 2 freezers. That same week, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who Hannah and I talked about on our podcast, appeared on cable news to tout the Trump administration's stimulus package, consisting largely of one-time $1,200 payments to individuals. In a let them eat cake moment for the ages, Mnuchin said he believed the package would provide economic relief for about 10 weeks. He failed to mention that the U.S. Treasury made it legal for banks to seize those meager checks for outstanding debts.
Yeah.
Here we are, how many months later from the original CARES Act? 10? 9 months later?
Something like that. It's been a minute.
We're waiting on, begging for, we had people in Congress begging for $600 checks. As that's happening, we are looking at, across the country, potentially 30 million people facing eviction. There's about 15 states that had no moratorium. And if anybody bothered to read any of the actual wording in Donald Trump's executive order, and the majority of his executive orders have been very, very titular, it didn't do anything. So people are being evicted right now in the middle of a pandemic. Here in California, Hannah, you're down south. Operation Room Key was a $500 million operation for the state. LA spent $1 billion in 2019 to house 7,000 homeless people. And I believe there's 60,000 in just Los Angeles County alone.
At least.
Yeah, so that doesn't include up north up here. And this is just California as a microcosm of what the rest of the country is looking like.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are 2 things that I would want to address there. The first one is this question, of Nancy Pelosi and just like Mnuchin and not understanding where the vast majority of people in this country are. in terms of aggregate household debt, right? And that was true long before the coronavirus hit. So we talk in the book about ways that different forms of debt intersect, right? So we don't have adequate healthcare in this country. Families don't have ways to finance adequate healthcare, right? People don't have access to good insurance plans, affordable insurance plans, let alone universal healthcare. So if a member of the family gets cancer, right, which often happens, the payments on chemotherapy and the mortgage payment, let alone if you have a kid in college and you need to make a student debt payment or a tuition payment, right? Let alone the household bills, the other household bills, all of those conflict. So it's not like debts exist in isolation. It's one of the reasons that the Debt Collective uses this phrase, household debt, right? I'm thinking here of another one of our original Corinthian 15, Pam Hunt, right? So Pam was invited to Capitol Hill with some other debt strikers when Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jayapal announced their College for All bill that Bernie Sanders took up. And Pam is there. I wish I could show the video. Maybe I can send it to you guys some other time, right? Pam is there on Capitol Hill announcing this legislation. And Pam says that she has $100,000 worth of student debt. I forget what she says, right? The exact amount. She says that she almost lost her life in a battle against cancer. And when she was almost losing her life in a battle against cancer and barely able to pay or going into additional debt for those chemotherapy payments, she did lose her house because she couldn't keep up with the chemotherapy payments and the mortgage at the same time, let alone her student debt payments. And that now she has 3 grown children who have just graduated from college themselves, each of whom has an additional $50,000 in debt. And this is years before the coronavirus pandemic hit, right? So now, of course, we have massive unemployment. We have people seeking massive medical care and getting crazy bills for coronavirus, right? So we have a deepening of a situation that already existed. So when Pelosi is like, oh, this sucks. I have 2 freezers and one is full of gourmet gelato. Or when Mnuchin says, we're going to give you $1,200 and this is going to get you through for 10 weeks. Are you crazy? Do you know what those debt collectors are taking from those people, right? There's some statistic, I don't have it at my fingertips. No, I'm sorry, I should have looked at it before, that shows how much of people's stimulus checks went to debt collectors, right? It is sickening. The problem that we have on our hands, the pandemic is a problem. Racial capitalism is the fucking problem, right? That's what needs to be changed. The pandemic, it just lays it bare. It makes it worse, certainly, and it sort of newly exposes it to people who are like, why is it that different groups of people are exposed to disease disproportionately, right? It has exposed this for many people, but it's not, the pandemic isn't our problem. It has been racial capitalism leading up to the pandemic that has been our problem. So that's the first thing. Oh, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I want to continue with your thought, please. I don't want
to. There was a second part of the problem. There was a second part of the question that you asked me. The first one was household debt. And the second one, I wrote down CDP, but now I don't remember. I lost it. See, I got to write it down. I apologize. You remember what it was, Jason?
Say again?
It's the second part of your question. Whatever. It's all good. Okay, keep going.
Sometimes I have statements that end up being more like questions, and it's kind of more of a thing that it's not necessarily a question per se, but it's just, I find the importance of, I think the Debt Collective definitely was before coronavirus, but now coronavirus definitely has just laid bare the failure of capitalism. There was an article in NPR that came out, was it today, that said that the ambulances in SoCal are not going to be taking people that look like they can't make it. And this isn't a new thing. People have to understand, as the hospitals got overcrowded in New York, nurses were forced to a similar decision, but it was with wings of the hospital. This is also, Pascal and I were talking about this earlier, this is also going on inside of the prison system. And it stopped getting attention for whatever reason. And I have a very good friend that works inside of San Quentin prison. So now it's like, all right, we can only take 2 guys, nurse. There's 5 here. Who lives and who dies? That's literally what the ambulance driver is telling the nurse.
How about having a political climate in this country being so toxic and divided that some red state loving Yahoo is going to be like, well, this is what you get when you have those high tax blue states that are governed with these socialist governments. Don't we wish? They can't run themselves.
Yeah.
We have a lot of imbeciles who are beneficiaries of all kinds of largesse, whether they're labor unions, government student loans, private public universities, who all of a sudden think they actually made it on their own. And this is within the Black community, who all of a sudden believe that they are, like, oh, this is waste and neglect here. It's a problem with these Democrats. Oh, what's wrong with these people? These kind of myopic Jordan Peterson talking type folks who actually believe that they're adding something to the discourse when they play the little games and they say, it was like, oh, listen, we've got to be careful the way the economy is working here. It's not working for everyone. And then wink, wink, nod, nod, they go back to their, nonsensical right-wing third positionism. I mean, this is a reality that we have. This is reality. No, this is serious.
Yeah.
Because Jason and I have done several shows before on understanding that the failures of the Democratic Party for large segments of African Americans have created a void of fealty for this party that is sadly being sucked up with people turning into reactionary zealots, embracing, if not Trumpism, some kind of ridiculous neoliberal, talking point, imbecilic nonsense, whether it be Tom Sowell or whatever else. By the way, Tom Sowell went to college because of the GI Bill, and government largesse, just like William White, another Negro, right-wing economist who the GI Bill lifted him to his educational, excellence and allowed him to do what he was able to do, who were both beneficiaries of affirmative action, which they were derived. Yeah. I mean, this is the reality that we're in, where, the left flank of capital and the right flank of capital, which are both reactionary in either way, play this game of contempt and pity with Black people in this country. With the Republicans, it's contempt, and with the Democrats, it's pity. Yeah. When neither one of them really offer the solutions about the political economy that's grounding Black, brown, and many white people to powder. At the same time, we have a Black political class, which is often ignored when we talk about this phenomenon of racial capitalism. I'll be very, very candid with you, Professor Appel. I'm not a fan of the term racial capitalism because it assumes that, if capitalism wasn't racial, I'd be okay with it. Capitalism is bad enough on its own, and it's racial from inception. Now, we can talk about the evils of capitalism that are racialized. You can't have capitalism in the West historically without racialization.
Okay. Please, you got to let me. Okay, we're going to start from the end. So racial capitalism, as I understand it, and as I have been taught it at UCLA by Robin Kelly, Jemima Pierre, Cheryl Harris,
familiar with all those folks,
Peter Hudson, right? Mm-hmm. Exactly how what you just said, it comes out of the Black radical tradition, right? So it comes out of Black Marxism. It comes out of exactly what you just said, which is to say, capitalism and race have always already been entangled with one another, and you cannot understand one without understanding the other, right? So the way that we value and devalue labor, the way that we value and devalue land, the way that the settler colony of the United States can come and dispossess indigenous people, right? And use all of that land to then enslave African people and then open onto the world stage of global capitalism. That is capitalism, and capitalism is always already about forms of racial differentiation and dispossession. So it's not like, because I agree, the fucking Democrats, don't get me started on electoral politics. I am not into electoral politics, right? The way that hopefully the Democrats don't really use racial capitalism, but the way that race gets used, you said it, with pity by the Democratic Party, is this idea that if racism just could go away, then everything would be cool with capitalism. But the Black radical tradition that I have tried to learn, be a student of, right, would say that is absolutely false. And that is what is digging us into this bipartisan hole that you so perfectly analyze, right? Which is this idea that we can sort of have pity for racial inequality and that we can somehow tackle racial inequality without tackling capitalism. Racial capitalism says that doesn't make any fucking empirical sense. You have to understand one. That's why that chapter starts in Haiti, right? Because we can't start neoliberal capitalism with Thatcher and Reagan. So I just got to go to bat for me as a student here. This is not me as a teacher, but from what I have learned, especially from Cedric Robinson's book, Black Marxism, and how then that idea among white Marxists in particular, right, who kind of who see race as like not as important as class or as epiphenomenal to class, to use like a whatever academic word, will never be able to win that revolution if they don't understand the ways, at least in the Americas, that race and class are so fundamentally intertwined.
My definition is very simple. Race is a class of oppression within capitalism. Race is a class of oppression within capitalism. And, which shouldn't be surprising to you, race does not affect all Black people the same way within that class. Because what we've had in the 50-year counter-revolution that we're talking about, over 15,000 Black elected officials create what we call at Black Agenda Report the Black political class or the Black misleadership class. And as they, enjoy all of the refineries of becoming part of a multiracial elite, the life for poor and working class Black people are ground to dust.
Absolutely.
And powder.
Pascal, I would like to add one thing that you're not acknowledging, that Oprah can't buy $38,000 purses.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? What I would love to do is...
What do you mean?
No, you remember when they told her that they didn't think she was rich when she was at some store.
In other words, Oprah has been using her racial offenses that she spent on. She's confronted in European traveling shopping tours, buying $38,000 suits. They said, "Look, y'all, I'm still Black. They won't let me in. Oh my God! Even though I can charge it on my Amex, I'll be okay." So as a result, I mean, because we had a very good episode. I don't know if you got a chance to watch it with Cedric Johnson and Torrey Reed, who are Black. They come from a Black left radical tradition as well, Black Marxist tradition, particularly Cedric, who talk about why race reductionism historically has actually been an obstacle to policies that have actually benefited working class Black people. Because when you racialize capitalism in this way, what it always does is it leads to a buffer class of Black people who become racial ventriloquists for the majority of Black poor and working class, who end up negotiating to better their position within the system, more so to transforming the capitalist system at the behest of those that they're supposed to be ventriloquists for. And that's all I'm saying. We got to have a conversation with Professor Appel here, with Cedric and Torrey, man.
I would love that. I would love that. I totally
would love to have this conversation because I can see those brothers watching this show with their heads exploding like, oh my God, here we go.
I don't think so. I think they would recognize a kindred spirit in me. I mean, I think we have some places where we might differ. So what it calls to mind is the scholar Charles Sepulveda. He's an indigenous scholar, right? I was just listening to him and he was like, look, what indigenous people are demanding in the land back movement is we don't want in to white supremacy. We want the end of white supremacy, right? Land back says, and that disentangles contemporary capitalism from the 1700s, from the 1800s, right? So it's not that I am not, it's either race first or class first. And I completely agree that the race first democratic way of thinking is a complete block. But the problem is the thinking of either it's race first or it's class first without.
I don't think it has to be. I don't think it has to be
capitalism.
I don't think that you can address capitalism. First of all, as I said, race is a class project within capitalism, meaning that the main function of capitalism and its race being a class project is rendering Blackness to redundant reserve army of labor and all the negative that comes with that. The main function of capitalism and how it's racialized is that all of the negatives that comes from even the perception of Black people being the surplus reserve army of labor is done to intentionally keep the fulcrum of perception in the minds of the white majority, who are just as negatively affected, conceptually believing that capitalism is only failing them and they're Black, as opposed to realizing that they statistically make up a larger portion of the poor than anyone else.
Yeah.
So reducing race to a class within capitalism is an ultimate necessity of capitalism in America functioning. So for me, once you come, it's more important to realize, to have particularly Black people realize, is that capitalism doesn't work for us because capitalism reduces us to redundant reserve army of labor. Is more important for me than saying, well, we have racial capitalism in America. Because if you realize that the whole function of capitalism, which I think Milton Friedman would agree to, is that you have to have what they call the NAIRU, or the national rate of unemployment, and in order to make sure that you maintain the proper right of price controls for inflation and everything else, then you realize also that that means that a larger perception must be had in the minds of the polity that Black people make up that space than whites. And that's not something that this sane racial capitalism is going to address.
I think ultimately what you're really trying to say is that you want Ibrahim X. Kendi to come in here and settle this, right? That's like ultimately what you want, is like Robin DiAngelo's that are named the White Fragility Lady. Mm-hmm. You want her to come in here.
If it probably won't surprise you to say that I'm not really interested in hearing what either one of them has to say.
So
okay, I'm interested in saying something separate from this.
Okay,
hold on.
Okay.
Because I love this stuff, and this is like my professor life. It's related to activism intimately, but that I would love to have that. I don't want to get too far off into the theoretical bits of it without addressing. So first, one of the things that Jason said that now I remember, which is this question of eviction and houselessness, right? So that was the second part of your question before that I just wanted to raise, especially because I see Dawn is on or was on. Dawn's another Debt Collective comrade. And we've been working at the Debt Collective alongside the LA Tenants Union down here on a piece of legal mutual aid so that when the California moratorium lifts, because I agree the CDC moratorium is fucking useless, but when the California moratorium lifts, a couple things are going to happen. Not only are a million people or more in this state going to face eviction, but also for all of those people who didn't pay rent between last March and whenever that's going to lift, right? Say that's January, February, March, that debt becomes consumer debt, right? Ooh. It will no longer be rent debt, which you can be evicted for. It will now convert legally to consumer debt. So we have a very serious debtors union situation on our hands because, as we know, and this is true, it's an assembly bill in California, but it's also true in New York State. I have some research assistants trying to figure out where else it's true across the country. But it is to say that even if folks are able to stay in their homes because they got their job again and they're able to pay rent that first month after it lifts, if they didn't pay rent for the last 12 months, all of that will become household debt. And you know that you go all by yourself to small claims court, or you're hounded all by yourself by a debt collector, you're not going to be able to fucking pay that shit back, right? Like it's going to follow you forever. Whereas if you are a member of a debtors union, right? And if everybody who owes your landlord, or better, everybody who owes that private equity landlord, everybody who owes that corporate landlord, right, can come out unionized and say, we can't pay and we won't pay, and we want to keep our homes, and we don't want this on our, right? So that's the kind of where we see the cancel rent demand going. So the Debt Collective is doing a bunch of organizing work there. And I just want to shout out Dawn, if you're still here, Dawn and I, and Isidro, you're here too, I think. Isidro, Dawn, and I have been working really closely on that. So I just wanted to say that. And the last thing I wanted to say was about electoral politics and this question about the Democrats and the Republicans. And Pascal, I completely agree with you. This bipartisan neoliberalism that has just, I mean, it predates neoliberalism, but the bipartisan problem, electoral politics aren't the answer. They're just not the answer.
I'm sorry, can you say that again for the people in the back?
Electoral politics are not the answer. Electoral politics are not the answer, which is to say we have to build power, right? We have to build power. We can build power through workers' unions. We can build power through debtors' unions. We can build power in all kinds of ways, but we have to build power. That's how we win, and then get them first to parrot stupid, bastardized, assimilated versions of what we believe and what we're fighting for, but later to those much bigger, much more systemic wins, right? Actually, it makes me think of something of MMT, but I'm not going to go there.
Why not?
No, this is
why do you think Dr. Appel? I'm calling you Dr. Appel. Teach.
Dr.
Why
Appel,
do you think you're here? You're here for one reason only. You fill an hour and a half.
She brings the fire. She brings the fire.
Okay, let me say, when we were in the green room, I think it was when we were in the green room.
Yeah.
We had a brief talk about modern monetary theory, right? MMT.
Yes.
Okay. So I agree. We only had just started, so I'm excited to hear what folks have to say, what Pascal has to say in particular, because you were talking about it. But so I completely agree that modern monetary theory, first of all, it's capitalist, right? Modern monetary theory is an explanation for the system we have now. It is not an explanation of another possible system. It is an explanation of the system we have now, and how the system we have now, if we understand it properly, right, which for modern monetary theorists is understanding it as they understand it, which is the United States has monetary sovereignty over our currency, which means that the Federal Reserve can issue as much currency as is needed to pay for the social programs for which there is political will. So if there is political will for housing for all, if there is political will for medical care for all, if there is political will for college for all, if there is political will for abolition of the prison industrial complex and investment in other forms of community safety and transformative justice, if we have the political will, then we can find the resources to spend it, right? That's what MMT says. But Pascal said in the green room, and let me know if I'm mischaracterizing you, but I think it's so important. Pascal was saying, yes, but it relies on the military industrial complex, which I took to mean, and I agree, that it is a fundamentally capitalist, growth dependent model because it describes the system we're already in. It doesn't describe a changed system.
You're being too kind. You're being too kind. Because MMT assumes, modern monetary theory assumes that the functions of capitalism, that the capitalists use to preserve the system for themselves, will be used to preserve basically Keynesian state welfare programs that people like, that they think are revolution. Let's say when you say that, listen, quantitative easing is a mechanism that the Federal Reserve is utilizing to cause liquidity in the market, to preserve the ability of banks to basically gamble on money in different currency rates around the world and make cash. And then you say, well, since the Federal Reserve can do that to cause liquidity and allow banks to flow cash against each other, then your next statement is, as a modern monetary theory, then the Federal Reserve can flood the market with cash through quantitative easing to give us Medicare for all.
No.
Now, if you're saying that that's not what modern monetary theory is, then I'm glad you will correct me, because I've seen modern monetary theorists make that same argument.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to be educated.
Yeah, no. This isn't me educating you. I am also a student of it, and I am also I think it is an exciting and important next step with very serious limitations that we have to think about. But one of the things that I think is interesting about modern monetary theory, and here I'm using specifically the work of Stephanie Kelton, she has a recent book out called The Deficit Myth. So is this a kind of what I hear in your explanation, and probably agree with you, is a false separation, even just for the purposes of understanding, between the public sector and the private sector, right? I know it's not worth, if we're understanding capitalism systemically, it's not worth separating those. But here's an anecdote that Stephanie Kelton and modern monetary theorists often like to give, right? So in 2019, the military asked for, the Pentagon asked for a budget of, I forget the exact numbers, $200 billion, right? They were given by President Trump a budget of $270 billion. Did they, and of course by bipartisan agreement in Congress, did they ask for that extra $70 billion? No, they did not. They only asked for $200 billion, and they got 270 because there is broad bipartisan support for the military. Now, often if we were to have said, for example, actually, we want that $70 billion to go toward a housing guarantee, or we want that $70 billion to go toward alternatives to incarceration, we would be met with, well, how are you going to pay for it, right? We would be met with, what are you going to cut for that? Which taxes are you going to raise for that? When President Trump gave $70 billion more dollars to the Pentagon than they asked for, were anybody's taxes raised? Was any budget cut from anywhere else? No. Because the Federal Reserve can simply mark up the bank account of the Pentagon. They could do the exact same thing with, and it's because there is broad bipartisan support for the Pentagon. If there was broad bipartisan support for housing for all, for medical care for all, they could similarly just mark up the bank account of that department. Now, your question, which is much more about financial markets, quantitative easing, the relationship of the Federal Reserve to private banks versus the relationship of the Federal Reserve to congressional or to government budgets, and how those two things intersect. There, I would have to be your student. That's something that's actually a very live research question for me right now, and what I'm working on, because one of the primary problems is that it does rely on U.S. dollar sovereignty in the world. And I work a lot outside of the U.S. for the U.S. dollar.
What secures U.S. dollar sovereignty in the world? Mostly
oil, also treasury bills.
And what is dispatched to protect those interests globally?
Oh yeah, the military. No, I totally agree with all of that. Oh, I agree with that assessment. And now I see what you're saying, that it's not only the military because the military stimulates growth, but also because it is defended by U.S. imperialism.
There's a reason why the United States has 800 military bases around the world,
right,
compared to any other country.
Right.
Because the empire of the United States, as my comrade Jaruba bin Wahad likes to say, that this is a garrison state. And the operation of the military is a primary function of this garrison state to succeed in the world, to protect its global empire.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to tie modern monetary theory, which aspirationally assumes that the same way the budget will go to the military and to other domestic agendas, it can be used for Keynesian-like social services.
Okay, but this is the thing. It's not aspirational. No. That's why I got there through talking about why fuck electoral politics. Electoral politics will not save us, because exactly as you're saying, those stupid Democrats and Republicans are just going to be like the military. Organizing, right? Building power to force elected officials to put that money to housing for all, to put that money to Medicare.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So that it's not aspirational, like, oh, one day they'll just be enlightened and not.
I don't believe those items. Yeah. I'm not saying those items as movement items, demands, are aspirational. They are rightful demands in this capitalist society. Yeah. I have no problem with that. That we're trying to make not capitalist anymore. I don't have a problem with the demands. I have a problem with people who are economists assuming that the traditional functioning of either capitalist or Keynesian economics in America are going to give into those demands out of the logic of, hey, we can use it to pay X, Y, and Z. We can use it to fund A, B, and C. Ta-da!
I agree. The only way that they will cave into those demands is through massive people power, right? Through massive debtors unions, through massive labor unions saying, we will cut off your liquidity because your liquidity comes from us. It comes from us making our payments on our mortgages. It comes from us making our payments on our student loans. It comes from us making our payments on our car loans so that you can securitize them and they can circulate as whatever, securitized products, collateralized debt obligations. If we collectively can withhold your liquidity, then we can force you. And modern monetary theory, to me, isn't the end goal, but it is a kind of intermediate step, I think, to get public funding for those kinds of reparative.
I think it presents an interesting argument. So I think as a tactic, it's limited.
So you see it as a tool, then? You're saying it's a tool.
Yeah, I mean, precisely because it is capitalist in the ways that Pascal is describing, right? It's not it doesn't change anything systemically. What it would change, if it were ever to be realized, is it would only be realized through collective people power. And so therefore it would have changed a kind of mass movement. A mass movement would have something to demand very clearly and get very clearly if we are able to get, for example, free college, free healthcare, right? Free housing, more increased social housing, right? But modern monetary theory itself, and modern monetary theorists will tell you this, they see it as a description of the system we have now. They just see it as the political will would have to change. What would it take for money to be allocated differently? It would just take organizing and political will of us. I'm sorry, not of elected officials, of us forcing them.
I wanted to ask you a question only because my good friend and mentor Janice Graham is not on the show right now. And she was, I know she would ask you this question because she always mentioned this about debt. And I'm going to ask the question for her. As an organization, as so right on in terms of what the problem is, as the debt collective is, how do you create a vehicle to challenge the credit reporting agencies like Experian, TransUnion, and they're almost monopoly-like hold on credit reporting, which is almost ultimately as detrimental as the actual debts that people are in changing their ability to function in American society?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, if you go to the debtcollective.org website and you click, I feel like it's on tools or something like that, we actually have a way to dispute errors in your credit report. And ideally, right, what you wanted, I mean, so we offer those as tools of legal mutual aid, right? And one of them is the tool to be able to dispute errors in your credit report. And so that offers a kind of individual piece of legal mutual aid. We also run debt clinics where we bring these tools to organized communities, right? 2 organizers do train the trainers, helping them bring these tools to their communities. But what these tools can also do, right, what Defense to Repayment did for folks who went to for-profit colleges is they can be filled out collectively, which is to say 5,000 people can file them at once, 10,000 people can file them at once, 200,000 people can file them at once, right? Because exactly as you say, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian have the monopoly over the market. They are not accustomed to being challenged, right? But that we have automated these tools. And frankly, we don't have the organizing capacity, but we have the vision, right? Which is to say, if we can bring 50,000 of those people where we find Equifax, issuing people different credit ratings, not according to their likelihood of repayment, not according to their income, but according to their racial category, which may be something that you disagree with me about. But my understanding of the empirics, that happens.
That's injustice. That's illegal. That's illegal.
Exactly. So there are ways that we can bring them down through organizing. But then the question is always, it's the question of abolition, right? It's not only about bringing something down, but it's about what is the reparative, what is the transformative institution that might take its place. Now, do I think we need credit reporting and scoring? That's a broader question that we can talk about. But even in just a kind of radical reformist approach, one of the things that these organizations do is they have proprietary algorithms, right? Which is to say that the way that they determine who gets what credit score and who gets access to what is black boxed. Nobody is allowed to look at it. It is private information. If we were to have a series of public banks, if we were to have a series of public credit ratings agencies, in other words, if we were to have a truly public or socialized financial architecture, financial infrastructure, then all of those things would be open, right? We would see what they are. We would understand who needs a loan, why they need a loan, should they have a loan, will they be able to repay it? If they're not going to be able to repay it, what kind of job would they need to be able to repay it in the future, right? Talking about a federal jobs guarantee, which I felt like you were kind of hinting at earlier. So I think that to move that kind of financial infrastructure from private to public, so it's not only to take it down, which we can do and must do, but it's also to imagine what would replace it, even in a medium-term sense, right? And to me, that is socialized financial infrastructure, where that kind of algorithm, say, is public and open, and is, of course, about maximizing everybody's sort of flourishing in life rather than maximizing profits for the credit card companies.
I'm a big fan of credit unions as an option.
One way to go, for sure. Mm-hmm. For sure.
If you can see behind me, my son has stopped playing the drums and is telling you to be quiet.
I hear you, buddy. My sons are out there playing Beyblade right now. Yours looks too young for that.
Beyblade. His older brothers did the Beyblade thing as little guys, but his mom thought a drum set was a very quiet toy for Christmas. So, are you gonna stay? Are you gonna co-host with me?
Hey, buddy.
Yes. You want to co-host with me?
Let it ride.
Huh? He's gonna hide now. So how do we get the message out?
I want to tie into. This is a good question, Jason. You're about to bring out.
How do we get the message out?
Jason, what is the critique that we generally have about the way the left is formulated today, and how it's appealing to certain segments of this country, not servicing those who are most adversely affected?
Hey, real talk. I just got a side message from a friend that's enjoying the conversation quite a bit, and he's like, "You got to ask how do we get this financial knowledge to the people that are being affected by it most? That are the ones that, because this a lot of times this conversation, unfortunately, let's be honest, it's had on." And I watch Democracy Now!, but a lot of motherfuckers don't watch Democracy Now!. A lot of motherfuckers don't know about the Majority Report and the leftists on the fucking internet. So how are we getting this message out to the people that are really affected by it? Because when we go to the payday loan place, they're not talking about that.
One of the things of the goals that Jason and I have through this podcast is to revive, as you called it, the Black radical tradition, or the Black left, going back to Hubert Harrison, going back to the Colored Farmers Alliance, going back to Cyril Briggs, Hubert Harrison, going back to
A. Philip Randolph.
A. Philip Randolph, going back to Claudia Jones. All of these luminaries going back to the 20s and 30s, 40s of Blacks rooted in anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-sexist politics, anti-racist politics, is to revive that tradition and that discourse. But one thing that we are finding is that the quote unquote progressive left discourse in the main is dominated by a certain type of folk who are not really communicating to Black people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be very candid with you. I think that the work you're doing is so important, particularly these communities of color that are disproportionately being affected by these realities.
Yep.
As much as I have contempt for some of these traditional civil rights organizations, have you considered reaching out to even the mainstream civil rights organizations and making a presentation to perhaps the Urban League, NAACP, National Action Network, or we can have our concerns with Black Lives Matter, or even new grassroots coalitions or formations, because this discourse about debt forgiveness. Now, I will tell you why I think you may have a lack of success. And it's not because your presentation will be the problem. It's because the class interests of many of these organizations are frankly not rooted in realizing that the communities they represent are living in poverty, but to pimp off that poverty to line their pockets.
Yeah.
That's actually what motivates most of them in reality, though they will deny it.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And first of all, I appreciate there's a compliment in there about the Debt Collective's work. And I appreciate that. And this question, and I also just want to say, as to the revival of the Black radical tradition that you're talking about, I think that is incredible. And I completely agree with how profound that would and could be. And obviously you're doing that work on this podcast right here, right? Which I feel I don't know much about your audience, but I think, you're obviously already doing the work. So at the Debt Collective, we do partner with other organizations all the time. So that the images that you see from the action in Philly last night, that was sponsored by the Black and Brown Coalition in Philly. It was co-sponsored by BLM Philly. It was co-sponsored by Boricua Philly. It was co-sponsored by, I can't think of the whole list in my mind, especially because I'm not in Philly. So these are orgs that I'm not fully aware of. So we do partner quite a bit. And in fact, with our debt dispute tools in particular, one of the ways that we've done our community outreach is by bringing those tools. Don, who is in the chat, has done so many of these debtors clinics, right? We do them down here in LA with Youth Justice Coalition. We do them with, there was another org that we've done them with down here in LA. It's not only YJC, I guess it was mostly at YJC. We've done them at Homeboy Industries. So we've done them at especially for folks who are getting out of jail and prison, right? We've done them in like re-entry type orgs because people who are coming out are facing all kinds of crazy debts, let alone their debt from the criminal punishment system, bail debt, contracts, et cetera. We have not partnered with some of the mainstream organizations in part because our message is not very mainstream. Exactly as you say, their class interests are chucos. Thank you, Don. Their class interests are directly opposed, right? We are not a financial literacy organization. We are not going to come in and say, right, hey, folks, you are in debt because you've been financially irresponsible and you should be a little bit more responsible. And this is how to pay your debts, right? We are here to talk about collective financial disobedience and to do the political education work that might bring us all there collectively, right? Not advocating that folks just stop paying their debts and suffer the consequences individually. It doesn't make any sense to go on strike by yourself, whether a labor strike or a debt strike, right? So that is not...
I'm fucking up?
Say it again?
So you're saying I'm fucking up? Because I'm definitely striking.
No, I mean, if you're down for the consequences, then you're not fucking up and we support you. But it's not like for people who are not ready for the consequences, we're not going to be like, oh yeah, just go do it by yourself because we don't have the power by ourselves. If we're willing to suffer the consequences, it is empowering just to be like, whatever, fuck it. But that's not what we're saying to everybody. But that message is not a message that I feel like would be welcome at some of those more mainstream organizations. However, you didn't drop the word jubilee, but you dropped another word about forgiveness, debt forgiveness. And what it made me think of course, is the biblical concept of jubilee. And so one of our organizers, Lauren in Philly, just got reached out to by her pastor at a Black church, right, who was really excited about the action that they did and said, hey, there's this long biblical tradition of jubilee. Thomas, another one of our long-term organizers, has been really interested in this stuff, right? So I do think the outreach, not only to the Black church, but certainly inclusive of Black churches, ideally in neighborhoods where folks really are poor, right? There, I feel like because of that biblical history of debt abolition, right? I do feel like we could have kind of more buy-in there. And we have done some of these at Black churches, and it looks like Lauren, yay, shout out Lauren, maybe doing some more of that in Philly after the success of that action. So I guess that's what I'd say.
I think that's a good path.
We're trying.
I'm again, I can't say it enough. A lot of my friends in the podcast sphere, in the leftist podcast sphere, definitely were trying to do shows about the senatorial runoff, and my response was, I don't live in Georgia. And there's other things you could talk about with that whole shit, and it's definitely a thing, but I feel like right now people are so wedded to the thought of electoral politics that it feels like they're constantly waiting for Superman. In the show I did that's going to air tomorrow for all non-patrons, we were talking about how it feels like a lot of people are just waiting for the AOCs and the squads of the world to write legislation that will save them. Yeah. And people have forgotten about the fact that there's always groundwork that's done to get massive legislation passed. You don't get a New Deal just because FDR felt like being a traitor to his class.
That's right. This is exactly what I'm talking about the MMT business, right? So College for All is a piece of federally proposed legislation that was originally written by Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal. And when they wanted to announce it on Capitol Hill, who the fuck did they call? They called the debt collective strikers. They called Nathan. They called Pam. They called the debt collective because they said, this has been your demand. And you have been building power around this for longer than we have been in elected office in the case of those particular people, right? This is your legislation. You forced us to do this. That's not only a cancellation of all the debt, but is also free public college on the back end. This is your legislation, so you come and introduce it. Right. And then Bernie Sanders comes along, he picks it up in his presidential campaign, wonderful, college for all, medical care for all. That's great. But it's exactly as you say, Jason, which is that it took years of power building and grassroots organizing for us to then have that victory of there to be proposed legislation that actually did, in large part, except for the anti-capitalist part of it, parrot what we had been demanding for years, right? And folks don't know that. Folks think that those people just come along. So yeah, as for Georgia today, I already said how I feel about electoral politics. It is interesting, though. I will say that Stacey Abrams wrote a very public piece in Forbes many years ago about how much student debt she has. Mm-hmm. Stacey Abrams is a very good example, right, of a Black political class elite. I don't know her well. I admire the work from afar that she's been doing. She has something like $200,000 in debt.
Jesus.
She also is one of many siblings, and in kind of, like conservative terms, kind of the most successful among them. So she is expected, of course, to pay the debts and the living expenses of others in her family, right, who have not made it in the way that she has made. So she wrote in Forbes, of all motherfucking places, right, because there were people who were coming out, this was her original candidacy, who were saying she is not fit to run. Look at all the debt she holds. Look at how irresponsible she is. And it's basically a piece that says, I come from a poor family in rural Georgia. The only way I was going to get my ass through this college, she did not use this language. This is me using this language, right?
You're paraphrasing like a motherfucker.
The only way that I am going to get through college and that I'm going to get through Yale fucking law school, which is the most prestigious law school in the country, is by taking on a fuck ton of debt because I don't have that intergenerational wealth to get me there, right? And then because I have made it, I have all of these financial obligations to my community and to my kin network. And so this is not, Stacey Abrams says in Forbes magazine, about individual irresponsibility. This is about a system that has failed poor working families. And so anyways, it's a Georgia anecdote that I think is about building power and not about whatever is happening there today.
We're at an hour and a half. How are you feeling, Hannah?
I'm feeling good. My kids are going to have to go to bed soon, and it'll be my turn.
I figured as much.
Yeah.
I know you have some little ones.
I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you didn't find me being abrasive, as Jason accuses me all the time.
On the contrary, I want to come back or just like have my own long conversation with you that I worry like half the audience will tune out because it's just us like in our crazy nerd land with all of those other people you mentioned whose work I know. I just feel like this is such an important conversation. I feel like it's intellectually important. I feel like it's politically important. And I also just feel like it's strategically important. So I want no. It was
strategically important. Yes, this is our first stream for the new year. I was pretty stoked as you said, yeah, you could do this date. So thank you so very much for coming on. For those of you guys watching, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you feel so inclined and you have the means and you want to help see the show grow, please become a patron. There's a link on the screen. We also put a link up to purchase the book, Can't Pay, Won't Pay, from Haymarket Books. Written by Professor Hannah Appel, Astra Taylor, and there's one more author.
Yeah, it was written by the Debt Collective. Ann Larson is in there. Thomas Goki is in there. But this is the product of a movement. You know what I mean? This is like mind meld that we've all produced together over the last, I don't know what it's been, like 10 years now.
And it's a book that got me fired up as I was reading it, because let me say this before we sign off. I have to read a lot because unlike you and Pascal, I did not spend the majority of my 20s going to school. I spent it fucking up and playing rock music all over the world. So I got to catch up to you motherfuckers, right?
Sounds like we have catching up to do too, but yeah.
And
we all do.
So I spent a lot of time reading, and there's definitely authors that I'm not the biggest fan of, right? Because I fucking hate reading overly academic shit where I have to have a dictionary next to me. I hate it. Did not do well in the verbal part of the SATs. Reading your book, I'm telling Pascal about it. I'm like, check it. it's not the academic book that I was scared it was going to be. It's a fucking call to arms.
Yeah.
And it made me feel excited when I read it, and it made me feel excited for the show. So as I'm getting comments from my friends in the podcast sphere of, hey, why don't you want to do this fucking thing about the runoff, and we can talk about Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell ad nauseum. I was like, no. There's other people that do that shit that are better at it, and I don't care. I actually care about people in my community that, you know what? The homeless people that I deal with, they don't give a shit about Georgia because Georgia moves nothing for them.
Yeah.
But when I tell them about this, ears perk up. And ultimately, that's what we want to do. Where we want to make the debt collective as big as possible.
No, I'm happy to hear that. And I'll end maybe with like a fantasy, which would be a lot of ways this could go. But imagine if the idea of a debtors union took off to the extent that we could have organizers at every payday lending spot in Oakland, right, where I lived for many years. I'm from the Bay Area originally. At every payday lending spot across the country, who said, as folks went in, right, who took some of their basic information, who knew which big bank was a major investor or major shareholder or even owner of that payday lender, and could start building a union, right, of folks who are forced into the payday lending industry, again, because the financial system is not working for them, let alone the wage system, let alone any fucking system, right? That, to me, is the ideal, that there is a debt collective organizer at every payday lending spot in Oakland, at every check cash spot, at every rent to own spot. That's like, look, you having to be here actually means that you could have power. This could be a source of your power right here. And, you know, signing people up to the union and getting them to exercise power over the way that they're able to access what they need.
Well, I'm down. And before you totally hang up, we have to have a Bay Area talk, because I don't think you told me what school you went to. So we have to figure out if we know each other.
Oh, well, maybe. What high school I went to?
Yeah.
I went to University High School in Pacific Heights. I'm kidding. It's called Pacific Heights.
No, there is some Pacific Whites in right. Pacific Heights.
It's really called Pacific Heights, but I need to say the actual name, which is Pacific Heights. Yeah.
So you're from the city?
I am from the city, yep.
Okay. Well, we'll stop with this regional conversation. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch the show and check out this wonderful conversation. Again, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this conversation. Go get the book. Can't Pay, Won't Pay. It's out now on Haymarket Books. I think the ebook is like $4 right now.
Yeah, it's all pretty cheap.
Everything is on sale on Haymarket, I believe, at 40% off. Can't Pay, Won't Pay. Pascal, Hannah,
Pascal, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Let's keep it up.
All right, don't hang up yet. We are